Right, up next we have Nate Edwards with Lessons from Beneath the Surface.
Go, Nate.
As a kid born in the 70s in San Diego, I grew up in the water. Summers meant spending hours boogie boarding and body surfing at Ocean Beach. I was a strong swimmer and knew enough about rip currents to swim parallel to the shoreline when they happened. I loved challenging myself to stay underwater across the entire length of the giant pool at the Konakai Club on Shelter Island. Diving for rings 15 feet down at the bottom of the deep end was a thrill. I loved swimming. But as the middle child of two alcoholic parents who were both checked out and abusive, I got zero parental support to do any organized team sports. I had some awful memories of being picked last for games and sports during PE as a kid. So as I grew into an awkward, insecure teenager, I was very grateful for the few friends I had. My close buddies from junior high, Arthur, Matt, and Alex, had all done cross country as freshmen at Point Loma High. I regretted that I hadn't joined them. So I committed to running all the summer practices in hopes of making the team as a sophomore. That also meant surviving a 6-day high-altitude training trip in the mountains of California to help the team build lung capacity, speed, and endurance for the 3-mile races coming in the fall. So I packed my Walkman, cassette tapes, and various essentials for our trip to our mountain training site. 25 of us were accompanied by Arthur's coach, Arthur's father, our coach, as well as 2 assistant coaches who were running enthusiasts and former Navy rescue divers. After arriving, we did different kinds of runs every day, goofed around and mixed in other training as well. It was great. We were training between 5,000 and 7,000 feet for most of the trip, with some of our runs going even higher. On the second to last day, we had our most challenging run. 14 miles, longer than I'd ever run in my life. With 20% less oxygen at that altitude, our lungs burned even harder, and our running was even slower. It was going to be 7 miles to the lake, then a quick swim for fun, before 7 hard miles back to camp. I was scared I'd fail, but coach said we had it, so we just started running. You know, I prayed I'd make the team if I kept training hard enough. But I regularly ran in the bottom third of the pack, and sometimes in the very back. Despite my lack of talent, I love being part of the team. I'd never been on one before. Before joining, I felt like an outsider and barely had a lick of confidence. The idea of being on the cross-country team made me feel really good about myself. Maybe except for the running part. You know, after slogging through the first 7 miles of the run, we arrived at the mountain lake. We were tired, but the lake was beautiful, and there was an enormous boulder over 10 feet high right on the water's edge. Within minutes, most of us were doing cannonballs into the lake and having a great time. It was a perfect summer day, and I felt like a kid again. But I noticed my friend Paco was hanging back. He dipped his feet in the water, but no further. Some of the guys were hassling him. Jump off the boulder. But he was making excuses. Our team captain, Rob, said, I thought your dad was a Navy SEAL. Come on, you pussy, jump in the fucking lake. Others chimed in, chanting, do it, do it, do it. Paco, who was 6 inches taller and 50 pounds heavier than me, said, guys, I can't really swim, so you gotta come get me if I don't come back up. Everybody laughed. A few of us said, we got you. And the rest of the team cheered and encouraged him to jump in. Smart, right? And my crazy friend Paco, who could not swim, but grew up with enough 80s toxic machismo to choke on, did indeed jump off that 10-foot boulder right into the lake. After his big splash, time slowed down, and it took ages before he resurfaced, thrashing wildly before his head disappeared below the surface again. Rob jumped in to rescue him while we stood transfixed. Paco immediately latched onto Rob, pulling him underwater, trying to stay on top of him. Rob struggled and struggled before finally fighting him off and then swam back out of Paco's panicked grabs. Then second captain Brian jumped in just as Rob was spent and did his best to save him. But clearly none of us had proper rescue training. Brian failed almost as quickly as he started. Now I had to find my moment of truth. Paco was macho on the outside, but also the lone weirdo who really got me. The only one sensitive and vulnerable enough to ponder the angsty, melancholy lyrics to Morrissey songs with me that we both loved so much. I had to jump in and do my best to save him. So I gathered my courage. I swam up to my favorite idiot, but was too ignorant to dive under him from behind to get his head above water and prevent him from grabbing me. Instead, I approached from the front and was promptly overpowered. Before I comprehended it, I had volunteered to become his human flotation device. I could feel the raw panic fueling that primal part of his brain, fighting to keep him alive at all costs. But I was the cost, unfortunately. And I really did experience that cliche moment of life flashing before my eyes as the struggle for another gulp of air seemed less likely to happen than my approaching death. I knew I had to get away. Then his legs decided to up the stakes by locking around my chest, squeezing the air out of my lungs. My strength and oxygen were fading. Things were starting to get dark at the edge of my vision. I wondered if this was it. Yet somehow, from deep within, my last fight kicked in. I found the well of strength I desperately needed. I rode it, fought out of his leg lock, and broke my head above the surface of the water. I pushed off and swam towards the shore where the team pulled me out of the water. I was alive. And right afterwards, our two amazing rescue divers jumped in together and saved Paco's life. nobody died. But we still had to run 7 miles back to camp. It didn't matter though. I was high on adrenaline for the first time in life and tearing it up at the front of the pack. The coaches kept telling me to slow down. I did not. Now I was the speed demon, not back of the pack. I felt unstoppable. That run was the best, most invigorating of my life. The wind kissed my cheeks as my manic pace tore a hole through the space-time continuum. I had cheated death and was sprinting past it with glee. You know, when we finally returned to camp, we all had different lessons learned. Looking back at mine, all these decades later, I see that my early brush with death wasn't a cheat code to escape the painful struggles that still awaited the first 50 years of living. But I knew that my story had important chapters yet to be written. Later that summer, I fell in love for the first time. It was magical, and just like life, I knew it was a force worth fighting for. My terrifying glimpse of mortality's ephemeral nature helped me unlock an unceasing gratitude for all the beauty that life has to offer. Now, as a licensed therapist, when I see others in darkness, I feel empowered to be a guiding hand back towards light and community. And all these years later, I have the foundation to effectively help others avoid drowning in their own traumas. But nowadays, I much prefer throwing life preservers in the form of lovingly taught coping skills rather than risking my own life as a haplessly flung human flotation device. Thank you.
Thank you, Nathan.